Give me your gun. Come on. I'm the reason you just got hurt. Let me help.
No, I can't let a civilian do that. That's against regulations.
Yeah, well, I don't think they had zombie-infested malls in mind when they wrote those regulations, kid.
You know how to use this?
Kinda. I've covered wars, you know.
So, for Christmas last year, I did a review of Dead Rising 4. I figured it would be a neat game to review as a Christmas special, and it certainly was. But a lot of what I said in that review was based on the idea that it was lazily retreading ground already covered by the first game. So, I'm here to review that exact game and try to explain how the first did it so well, whereas the fourth game felt soulless and mediocre. Welcome to Willamette Mall. You've got 3 days. This is Dead Rising.
This is my most violent shot. Check it out. Ugh. Okay, here's the deal, Frankie. You gotta go out there and take even better pictures than the ones I just showed you. You think you can handle that, huh?
Yeah.
Dead Rising released on the Xbox 360 in 2006, and as such followed a trend that a lot of games back then did, which was to try and focus on realistic graphics with the new high-end GPU tech. Unfortunately, that means a lot of games from that era tend to show their age, and not many survive this. But fortunately, Dead Rising did survive this. For the most part. The absurd, sometimes even outright goofy B-movie style that's embedded in Dead Rising as a parody of Dawn of the Dead allows for the style to not come off as bad, just old. Let me explain what I mean. Some games are just hard to look at nowadays, but others are just old. For instance, Oblivion does not look good anymore. It just doesn't. It followed a dated trend of saturating everything with post-processing and bloom effects because that was the shiny new thing. It would only start to look good after people put the brakes on it and learned how to use it properly. It's dated, it doesn't look good anymore. But Dead Rising is just old. You can see its age, that's very apparent, but there's nothing about it that's difficult to look at or deal with. Now, let's move on to something that doesn't need such a long tangent to explain my thoughts on it. The music. The music is spot on. The intercom music is generic and cheesy, but hearing it so much while walking through a mall of groaning zombies really adds to the eerie feeling that the mall has as a whole. Mall Music 3 is iconic at this point. You've been listening to it this entire time, in fact. Beyond that, the psychopath boss fight themes are a great contrast to the quiet and cheesy intercom music, as you're suddenly hearing intense electric guitars and singing that, to me at least, is barely comprehensible. Which I suppose would be fitting for a psychopath. Someone who has completely broken down mentally and turned to some twisted and violent reality in the midst of a zombie outbreak. So yeah, I'd say the presentation is pretty good.
Here she is. Willamette, Colorado. Population 53,594. Distinguishing characteristics? Jack shit. About the only thing to do in this town is kill time at the shopping mall.
The story is one of the things I put some focus on in my Dead Rising 4 review. In that, I complained about how the story is pretty much a lot of retreading ground the first game did, and how the game failed at doing this with any sort of real passion or charm to it. Most of that comes down to two things. One, how they treat the story, and two, the consistency of Frank West. Starting with the story itself, Dead Rising 1 is a much simpler story. Journalist Frank West gets flown into Willamette Mall to get the scoop of a lifetime, gets in over his head, and tries to find the truth before he has to escape in 3 days. Simple to understand, good for a first entry. 4 has something similar, though it leans way more into the government conspiracy angle. But here's why 1 does it better than 4. Dead Rising 1 does not take itself seriously. It is a parody and it understands this, using the basic setup to create interesting scenarios that would otherwise be good drama, but are instead flipped because Frank really does not care. He is consistently breaking the tension of dramatic scenes and plot progression, and everyone hates him for it. Which brings me to my second point, the consistency of Frank as a character. In the first game, you know who Frank is from the word go. In the very first gameplay segment, Frank is taking pictures of Willamette and is actively snapping photos of people who are being eaten by zombies. It's not only a good way of introducing a prominent mechanic, but it also shows you how Frank is going to act throughout this story. A snarky, self-centered journalist more concerned with his own fame than even some people's lives. He doesn't change very much from this either. Yeah, he gets attached to some people through proximity, but he's always trying to coax out information and take pictures even in the most awkward of moments. Compare this to Dead Rising 4, where Frank is jumping between being traumatized by the first outbreak, caring about the safety of one of his students, and then also trying to be the snarky journalist from the first game with no logic behind it. His attitude just shifts from scene to scene based on what seems best for the drama. So yeah, the first game is a simple story that keeps its characters consistent while also providing a good parody of the zombie genre, in comparison to the fourth, which takes itself way too seriously and doesn't know what to do with the main character at all. The gameplay is where I have to admit future games got it better. Granted, this game did come first, so of course it's going to be much more on the rusty side than its sequels. Dead Rising's base gameplay is simple. You run around the mall as Frank West using whatever things are lying around the mall to fend off the zombies while you progress the game. There's no crafting system or anything like that either. It's pure scavenging. Frank is also very out of shape, so he's slow and kind of clunky, making combat a bit more tense sometimes, despite the fact that the most common enemy is slow and stupid. Though occasionally the human AI can prove to be dumber than the zombies themselves. This is especially seen with some of the psychopaths where my main cause of dying is my own hubris rather than exploiting the AI. Vehicles are really only there to get you around the underground maintenance tunnel shortcuts, and the leveling system is very basic, simply giving you more health, inventory, attack, etc. every time you level up. The standout mechanic, though, is the iconic time limit. When the game says you have 72 hours to get your story and get out, they mean it. The clock is always ticking, but it's not always a rush like most time-limited games are. The clock isn't realistic, but it's definitely really slow and very gradual. It's not really there to tell you to play the game as fast as possible, but rather to encourage replays, as it's inevitable that you will not be able to get every survivor or psychopath in a single playthrough. The time limit just restricts that as a way of getting you to play the game over and over again to see what other characters there are. And if you're rusty on the game like I was and don't focus too much on managing your time properly, get ready to see the X-Survivor is dead notification a lot in your first playthrough. Don't let it get to you though, you can always try again in another playthrough. That's exactly why it's there. Although there are moments where the timer can create some good suspense since it's running 24/7. Like how I nearly failed getting medicine back to Brad on time because I was trying to navigate tunnels. The last thing I want to mention is the save system. You can only save via the security room bench or the restrooms spread throughout the mall. And I mean it when I say that's the only way beyond completing a chapter. This game doesn't really do checkpoints, so if you die, you're reloading your most recent save file. So be careful about saving, that way you won't end up backtracking as much as I did.
Get your aim right, brother. Yeah.
All right, looks like we found our next contestant.
All in all, Dead Rising is definitely a game of its time, but it is still very enjoyable now. Assuming you're into this kind of game, of course. The flip side to everything I've said here is that Dead Rising also comes off to me as a love it or hate it game. If you're at all into this kind of stuff, you will adore this game. But if it doesn't look like your thing much at all, then don't even bother because there is nothing here that will make you enjoy it. Though personally, I would still recommend it as a piece of mid-2000s gaming history, for better or worse. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later. And lastly, a special thank you shout out to my Patreon. With $5 a month pledge is a sad old man eating Pringles by himself. Thank you for the $5.